Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach, mates. Well, with round 9 done and dusted, my Collingwood are still going really well, which I'm happy about after a 5-day break. As per normal, I am joined by Thomas. How are you going, Thomas?
Yeah, not too bad. This is our third time trying to get this
Tom, yeah.
recording right. We've had a few technical issues, but we're underway, which is good. Yeah. St Kilda definitely frustrating again against the Blues. I know your Magpies are flying as usual, and you've already decided to try and lock in grand final tickets this early in the season, so we'll see how that eventuates. But
No, we've booked a hotel room.
yeah, book a hotel
Refundable,
room.
of course.
So you're halfway there. But yeah, SuperCoach wise, we'll crack into that in a little bit. Going all right, so I can't complain there. Was outside the top 1,000. I got bumped out the side of the top 1,000 last round, and this round scored quite healthily to get back in the 1,000, which you can't complain, which is always nice to see. But we'll get straight into it. To start things off with, Nathan's going to have his weekly rant segment where he kind of lets off a bit of steam, but this time it's a little bit relevant to SuperCoach or specifically to a certain D's midfielder who you may or may not still have, and it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward if what Nathan's about to unleash on is going to continue. But take it away, Nathan. What have you got for us this week?
Yeah, well, with this round being so close in terms of the margins, I think there was only one win by more than 20 points. It didn't really feel right to take a pot at a particular side, given the closeness of the round. But if there was one side that was going to pop up, it was going to be Melbourne, which coincidentally was the only side who did lose by more than 20 points. But I want to have a bit of a rant this week at Clayton Oliver and probably more so Simon Goodwin. So I don't know where Clayton Oliver sits in terms of his time at Melbourne because you don't use a marquee prime piece of your midfield as a tagger like I saw on the weekend when he basically went and tagged Jai Newcomb. So I as I said, I don't know where he is with Melbourne. I think Melbourne should have moved him on last year. Just because he doesn't seem as invested as what he was there. And obviously being used as a tagger now, despite earning, $1 million a year, I just think screams, of a player that, wants to move on. But I think I'm more going to go after Simon Goodwin here because, he's probably got other players who he can put in that tagger role. But to try and sort of reinvigorate Oliver into that starting lineup after, all the fallout from last year's failed trade and then the commitment from both people that they were going to improve, I just haven't seen it this year. And now I think by using him as a tagger, I think is a sign that perhaps there is a bit of a lack of trust there with Oliver and where he's at. Obviously, last year I saw this firsthand with Steel Sidebottom being used as a tagger, which sort of didn't really sit well with me given that he's a good runner. But it does sort of spell the importance of having a really strong preseason, which I don't know if Oliver's really had that good a preseason. Yes, I think he got through, but I think he got through most of it. But it's more about his dedication and stuff, which just doesn't seem to be there. So I think now is the right time for Melbourne to part ways with Oliver, and I think it'll be a mutual win for both sides. Being Oliver, that he gets a bit of a fresh start, and they can thank each other for the memories. He helped Melbourne get their first premiership in about 50 years, even if it wasn't in Melbourne. But yeah, I think now is the time to just say, you know what, this hasn't worked. Thanks for everything, but I think it's in our best interest to part ways, and let another club who can provide him. With a bit more of a defined role, have him on on their books, and also for Melbourne, it gives them a bit of an opportunity to clear off a lot of his salary, which, as I said, was over $1 million a year. So, unless this improves, I probably would be moving him on if you've got him in SuperCoach. Because I think once you're a tagger, I don't think, and you do so well, like he did, I think that's going to be an ongoing role for him. So, yeah, I think my rant this week, yeah, as I said, it was kind of a bit tricky given that all the games were close, but this was something that sort of caught my eye upon review of this game was, yeah, seeing Oliver tag John Newcomb. So, I think for both parties, it's in their mutual interest to just split and go their own ways, thank each other for all the memories they've had, and move on with life.
Yeah, definitely frustrating for super coaches, I guess, is we all picked up Oliver really hoping that he could find his best form this season and just quite hasn't reached the heights that we hoped for. I guess he was pretty close to it in some games, but just really didn't crack it. I got rid of him a couple of weeks ago, and I think looking forward to even this upcoming matchup in round 10 for the D's. I think they've got the Lions this weekend, which I could easily see to my detriment as well as a Lockie Neal. Could he potentially go to Lockie Neal and do something similar to what he did to John Newcomb? Who knows? But definitely interesting to see whether Goodwin releases him as a tagger again, and whether or not this is the right move forward for Melbourne moving forward. As much as it might frustrate Melbourne supporters, as you got one of your prime ball movers being utilised as more of a defensive tagger rather than winning the ball and getting it forward. So who knows what happens for Melbourne moving into the upcoming weeks, but definitely one to keep an eye on for super coaches, that's for sure. But before we move on to our player of the round, just going to do a quick recap of how I went this week. Scored the 25 or just over 2,500 whilst I get this up here. So, yeah, if I just go back to my home screen, scored 2,519, which was definitely a positive score. Can't knock it at all. Was pretty surprised that I ended up scoring that highly. I guess I didn't expect so many players late to pop off, which was nice. Definitely thanks to Dunkley and Sherry in the last game to really get that score over 2,500. Season rank of 871 at the moment. It was a little bit frustrating last round. I got bumped out of the top 1,000. Now it's back in. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I can kind of hover around that mark. And really, once I get these dead rookies off the field, really can try and push up further than that mark. But if I just go quickly into how my side went, defense has been held up really nicely this year. We'll touch on a certain Essendon player as our player of the round. I guess you can probably guess who that may be. But the premiums definitely fired, which was nice. Whitfield's been very, very strong since I've brought him in, which is nice. Harry Sheasel, he's been a disappointing premium, to be brutally honest, and he's kind of hovering with those hundreds here and there. But I guess against a tough Brisbane outfit, he did what he had to do. He's someone that, look, if I get everyone off the field and every rookie off the field and start, trade sideways in premiums and have that luxury, Sheasel might be one that we have that conversation later down in the season. But he's one that I'm, obviously not going to trade out at the moment. He's just ticking along nicely. Jordan Clark, he was very, very impressive against the Pies. You would have seen him firsthand, Nathan, how he went. He was everywhere. He's playing a very friendly super coach role at the moment, pushing a bit higher up, and it probably helps out Luke Ryan a little bit because it leaves Luke Ryan that traditional kind of sweeper role, and Clark being that more aggressive halfback, which is definitely helping his scoring when he gets the ball. He gets plenty of the ball, and if he uses it effectively, his scores equate quite nicely. Roberts was the really disappointing kind of player of that back six. Sydney were pretty horrendous in that first half against the Dons, and that kind of reflected in most of the Swans scoring. So he was frustrating. And then Reid and Bice, we'll talk about a bit later as a potential trade-out option. They rounded out my back six. And the midfield, we talked about Brayshaw. I know Nathan was trying to sway everyone that would listen to him to get Dacos on the side as a VC option. I went Brayshaw pretty last minute, and he suited everyone nicely. He's probably been the winner of the two compared to him and Sarong. Sarong's been really average with getting those. I wouldn't say super average, but he's not really getting those high ceiling scores that I guess owners really hope for. Brayshaw, on the other hand, has been tremendously effective with how his scoring's been going, a 154 there. I guess the really downside of that midfield group, I got Huswaite in there from last week. I guess I rolled the dice. I had Boxall as that M8, and unfortunately he was really not scoring that nicely in that Carlton matchup. So I decided to roll the dice on Huswaite, and he didn't do much better. He got subbed out 3/4 time. So that probably shows how dire the rookie situation is. And the most frustrating player there, Lockie Neal, 81. I believe it was George Wardlaw who did some sort of defensive work on him. And I guess, looking forward, how does that look for Neil? He just looked disinterested in that game, to be brutally honest. Just was in second gear for the majority of that game and really didn't get going. So there's a little bit of a concern moving forward, whether or not that eventuates into further games and how that looks like with his scoring potential. But I guess he's a premium for a reason. Hopefully he can just continue churning out solid scores for the season. Let him roll until there's significant concerns around his role, or not his role, but the ability of him getting consistently tagged. The Rocks were definitely positive. DeConning was a little bit frustrating, I guess, with his scoring, only 104 there. Was hoping for a little bit more. Sherry was the one that saved me really to bump my score up to 2,500. He was really impressive. And the forward line did what the forward line had to do. Max Hall's been almost my rookie of the season, really. I brought him in quite late in the piece when I made my side, and he was definitely positive, scoring that 77, and he's priced at 300 and what is he now? 317k with the break even of 37 coming up against West Coast. He could easily score another 70 odd there, so he's making money really positively at the moment, and he's been almost my number one rookie for the season. And we can touch base on our rookie picks for the season as the season comes to a close later on in the year, but he's one that's really saved me, considering I've got a fair few dead rookies there, which has been probably the frustrating half of my team. But other than that, the forward line's been churning along nicely, and Chad Warner was the last one there as my flex player that I did bring in this week. He was looking pretty average against the Dons early days, as I said, most Swans players were looking like, but he basically almost single-handedly turned that ship around for the Swans, and he scored a 93 in the end, which was definitely can't knock that. I ended up bringing him in for Matt Flynn. So I guess, argument there, you could probably hold on Matt Flynn a little bit longer, but I kind of wanted Chad Warner before he spiked up over 500k, because I was more than happy to pay sub 500 for him. And Sammy paid off with that 93. But it'll be interesting to see what I do with my trades this week. There's probably one St Kilda player I'm looking at, which we'll talk on a little bit later, and how I facilitate that will be definitely interesting with the lack of rookies available. But that's how my team went. And just moving on, before we delve into the trade ins and outs for round 9, just going to bring this back up here to our player of the round, and I'm assuming me and Nathan are in well agreement here. Zach Reid.
Yeah,
he's been bloody awesome, I guess, with how he's gone about it in the last month of footy. He's saved a lot of defensive lines in SuperCoach. We all kind of, looked at him early days and said, all right, he's scoring 30s, 40s, 50s. We'll get rid of him as soon as we can. And he just turned it around completely, and he topped off his, stellar kind of month or so with 133 SuperCoach points against the Swans. Swans are probably not known for their super strong forward line, or known for not, they've been having a pretty weak forward line in recent times with their injuries, and he basically capitalised on that with the likes of Ridley gone. 27 disposals, 18 kicks, 14 marks. You can't ask much more from that. From Zach Reid, and I guess we're not trading him out anytime soon, are we, Nathan? Because I think with how he's going, you want to get as much money out of him as possible. And even, as a D6, you could hold him as long as you can until he starts to provide those stinking scores that we all expected him to consistently do. But he's definitely showing super coaches otherwise how he's going.
Well, his break even's -9, so there's no way you're trading him out.
Yeah.
And he's 385k, so there's every chance he could get to 450, 500,000. Which, I think out of all of the rookies, I think him and Ashcroft have probably been the two best ones so far
Yeah.
um,
Oh, he'd be
across the
laughing.
year that we've
Yeah.
probably started with. So, yeah, he was mine as well. Zach Reid. I think I messaged you on Saturday night and said I don't care about what happens at the Sunday games. He's going to be the player of the round, just given his price. But I will give a little shout out to Bailey Smith as well, who I think was someone a lot of us were perhaps umming and ahhing. I think you were in this camp, Thomas, at the start where you weren't sure
Yeah.
if you're going to pick him up. But he has been an absolute revelation at Geelong. I think he's 154 on the weekend. I think he's now the highest averaging forward among any SuperCoach player. Obviously, he missed the one game. And obviously, it's shout out as well to Tristan Cherry. I know you touched on him as well, but 186. And yes, I do apologize for anyone who has Dacos and Brayshaw and chose to go with Dacos, considering the fact that Brayshaw outscored him by about 80 odd points. So, yeah, that was a bit of a a bit of a rough, but at least I did go down myself because I did actually honor my advice and put the VC on Dacos. And yeah, so at least I went down with the sinking ship, as they say.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously, and then having a captain on Lockie Neal didn't help either. So it's a bit of a
Double downer.
yeah, bit of a odd week, but I am still doing well in draft. I can hold that in consolation. Although I did have my first loss a couple of weeks ago when I had Dacos and I think it was Dawson on the bench, and I both scored 150 plus. So perhaps I need to have a look at myself and some of the decisions that I'm making. But yeah, I just wanted to give a bit of a shout out to those players in particular who, yeah, I think helped out a lot of people this week with their schools.
Yeah, Zach Reid's definitely been one of those standards, as you said with Bailey Smith as well. He's definitely been, not flying under the radar, but providing some really solid scores with how they've been going down at the Catland. But Reid, yeah, as you said, if he can get to that definitely above that 400 mark with that negative break even, but if it's that 450k mark, then, trading, you'd be laughing if you get 450 out of him. But at the way he's going, if he's scoring those 90s to 100s almost on a consistent basis, who knows what he's capable of. But it does make the decision a lot easier and the sideways ability a lot easier with him if he gets, above 400k as he will. So for him to make that much money, it makes your life a lot easier because you can pretty much trade to whoever you want to with these defenders. And I guess you can hold him as long as you want to as well, because he is capable of those scores. So as we say, we try and get rid of those poor rookies off the field as quick as we can. But someone like Reid, we can kind of be safe that he's going to perform or peace of mind that he's going to score, quite safe on field, which is definitely positive. But moving on to our trade in targets for round 10. These are some of the options that I've been tossing up, and definitely super coaches of the like have been tossing up as options for this round. There's obviously not a lot of trade down targets that we can think of or options that we can get money out of, which is definitely frustrating. But there's targets that we want to bring in. One of them being Jack Sinclair, my boy from St Kilda, 529.3k, break even of 106. Last three scores, 124, 83, 99. So nothing to scream home about, but against the Blues, watching him quite closely, he's one that I'll get your opinion, Nathan, on him as well. But he's one that seems to be playing a lot more higher up on the field, and rather than playing that traditional halfback role, he's now kind of starting to play more of that midfield role, pushing up aggressively from the halfback line and trying to get the ball through the midfield. Is this concerning for you as a super coach option, I guess, because we look at halfbacks and we want, those traditional halfbacks, you get the cheap ball and utilize it quite effectively. Like, if you look at his St Kilda counterpart in Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, he's always an option there, as does that role very nicely. But what are your thoughts on Sinclair as a trading option this week? Plays the Eagles, which is a very positive matchup for him, and potentially a vice captaincy option. But what are your thoughts on Sinclair? Is he a viable trading option this week and someone that should be high on your radar, or is there some other players there that you might think otherwise might be a better option than Sinclair?
Yeah, well, I should just put the disclaimer on because I actually started with Sinclair this year, so I've
Oh yeah,
enjoyed
that's
his.
right.
I've had the roller coaster ride with Sinclair. But I mean, I would say without hesitation, if he's someone who you want to bring in, I would bring him in. You know what you're going to get from him. It's pretty consistent. He very rarely gets a tag out on that half back line. I feel like he only really cops the tag if he goes into the midfield. And I'm just looking at his upcoming matches here. So I don't think he's going to get tagged against West Coast. Dimmer Hardwick doesn't really tag, so he probably won't get one against the Suns. Melbourne, I don't know. I don't think if Melbourne are going to tag him, it's definitely not going to be with Oliver because he'll just run Oliver off his feet. The Dogs, I don't know about the Dogs either. I think Riley West has done some sort of jobs like that in the past, but I don't know there. Collingwood aren't going to tag him. Freo, I don't know about Freo. So yeah, there is a good sort of patch there for Sinclair to really get some scores on him. So, I don't think there's going to be too much difference between him and Nasiah. So I think if you can save yourself the 25k and get in Sinclair ahead of Nasiah, I think they're both viable options.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know what you're going to get from them most weeks. So, yeah, I definitely think you probably want to have Sinclair in your final back line. I will just get him up now. I think he's a top 6 defender still, Sinclair. Yeah, he's 4th for total points. So he's someone who you are going to want to have in your side by the end of the year. And now seems like a good time. Given that he might have a bit of an easier run. But it has been a little bit sort of frustrating, just a bit of a slower start to this season. But yeah, I'm hoping that he sort of had his down patch, if you will, the last month, and he can sort of string together a few good scores. So yeah, he's definitely would be someone I would be looking to bring in if I didn't already have him.
Yeah, at that price, I guess you can't really go wrong. Low 500s. Look, he's probably not going to make it. Probably not going to increase a shit ton of cash unless he goes berserk against Eagles with that break even. But he's one that is priced accordingly very nicely, and one that I think that if you compare him directly with Wanganeen Miller, what I've noticed is, as obviously St Kilda supporter watching St Kilda quite closely, Sinclair does sometimes feel like I feel he gets a little bit lost, not from a footballing aspect, from probably a correlation of SuperCoach with the ability to score heavily when he kind of gets stuck in that midfield rotation too much. And I guess the uncontested ball and the kind of cheap stuff he gets on the half-back line isn't utilised as greatly. But it seems like he's starting to find his feet with that transition from playing that traditional half-back role to pushing aggressively forward from half-back into the midfield, pushing up high up the ground. And that provides him as a goal threat as well. And I think it was late in the game against the Blues where I think it might have been the fourth quarter or late in the third. I'm not exactly sure when it happened, but it was just like an easy tap down from Marshall straight through the clearance and goal for Sinclair. So the goal threat's there as well. He's always up for 1 or 2 goals when he's through that midfield rotation. As long as he doesn't get too smothered by opposition midfielders when they're trying to do a job on him, I think he's always good for a good score. And his floor is really impressive. I think that's the big thing. We can always expect a pretty good score from Sinclair, as is with Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller. Like, there's probably not too many chances where Sinclair's going to get the 50s and 60s that some other defenders get. And the other benefit with him is he's got DPP as well compared to someone like a Miller if we're doing a direct comparison. Miller is defensive only eligible, and Sinclair's got that flexibility if you need it, which makes him maybe a little bit more enticing than, say, a Naz or another defensive only player. But I think he's a really good pickup this week, and someone that I'm looking at quite closely if I can somehow manage to bring him into my side. He's always a good fun to watch as well, and He's one that always has that attacking threat as well, because he pushes up higher up the ground. That also can correlate to some big scoring if you can get on a few scoring chains, which is definitely quite impressive. And I guess the other thing with Naz, if you want to do a direct comparison as well with the two Saints guys, Naz, I think the most frustrating thing with him, I feel, is he only scored 103 on the weekend, and it seemed like he had plenty of the ball, and he just butchers it sometimes a little bit too much, and I guess that hurts in SuperCoach compared to, say, a AFL Fantasy. So that's one to be careful of, is you're probably not going to get that many ceiling scores with Naz, like those huge 140s and 50s, where you probably might get that more often with Sinclair, just because of his more attacking threat and his very, very clean use of the ball. Not saying Naz isn't clean at all. He's elite by foot as well. But it seems like, just watching it quite closely, it seems like Naz needs a lot more of the ball to score hugely, which can be frustrating at times, where Sinclair doesn't need as much to score big. But if you umming and ahhing between two St Kilda players, I would say Sinclair's probably the way to go, with maybe a little bit better scoring potential, but also that cheaper price tag as well, and that DPP.
I think it's more the price.
Yeah, I'd say saving that 20k in a situation where we're looking left, right, centre for value options. I think Sinclair's the way to go, considering he started the season, I think it was just over 600k anyway. You're saving yourself a big discount by getting him at 530. But moving on to Saad El-Houli, which is an interesting one, because there's really not that many rookie options available at the moment. Saad El-Houli priced 155.7k with a break even of 19. That break even of 19 is obviously affected because of the sub games he's had. If I just bring up his scoring here, last 3 games, 69, 4, and 67. I believe the 4 was sub impacted, and he was sub the first game as well when he scored 16 back in round 3. So he's an interesting one as well, because you're paying obviously a bit more to get him in. But I think the question for you, Nathan, is, do you reckon he can stay locked in that Don side, or is there too much of a sub risk as well? Because he did play quite impressive against the Swans down that wing roll, provides a lot of pace through that kind of wing corridor, midfield area, pushing through half back, reminiscent of Adam Saad from Carlton. And he uses the ball quite effectively as well. Do you reckon his spot's in jeopardy at all, or do you reckon the Dons have unlocked something you think really, put his best foot forward and rubber stamp himself in that best 22 for the Don side at least in the next month or so?
Well, I think with Essendon's injury list, I would hope that he's fairly safe in that lineup. He does seem to be a bit of an X factor for them. He is someone who I think is a bit of a crowd, someone who does like getting the crowd involved, which I think every club needs one of those types of players. But obviously, with all of these younger players, as we saw on the weekend with Henry Hustwaite, there is always that inherent risk that he is going to cop the sub, whether it's sub as the start of the game or sub out of the game. I think this is something, unfortunately, that we're just going to have to live with until that rule gets eradicated. So is he... the only turn-off is that higher price of 155,000, but I don't really think there's anyone else standing out at pick me. There might be a Geelong player who might be a bit left of centre, who I think scored really well on the weekend, but I don't know what their job security is going to be like, and the fact that he's in his 30s is probably not going to be a high wheel. But I have seen on social media that some people have gone down that desperate path to bring him in, given I think his career average is about 50. So obviously I'm talking about Jed Buse, by the way. So if you're tossing up between Saad and El-Houli and Buse, I think I'd definitely back in El-Houli, just because Geelong do have a few injuries down in that back line. And yeah, I think El-Houli this week is probably the best of a really, really bad bunch this week, is probably what I'll say. Because I think I think Hugh Boxall, I don't know if he's going to hold his spot, which is going to be a bit annoying for me, given that I started with him in round one.
Yeah.
And I've just been waiting for him this whole time. So, yeah, as I touched on at the start, this is the time of the year where, unfortunately, SuperCoach does get a bit tricky because all of those starting rookies sort of hit the wall. We're sort of getting into the colder months, and there's not really a lot of younger players coming through or, cash cows coming through to replace them. So, yeah, Al Hawley is probably the best of a really average bunch this week. But if you've got I would even contemplate not trading at all this week if you don't have to.
Yes.
Just because there's literally like trading down, that is. Just because there is literally nothing standing out.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough week to be trading. It was tough last week as well. That's why a lot of people went early on Boxall, including myself. I guess the benefit with Al Hawley, he's got that DPP and quite an important DPP at that with defence mid eligibility. So I guess if you want to get creative, you can swing. It allows you to swing him back and forth with the likes of, say, a Sheasel or a Sinclair, play them through the mids, allows you to get an extra defender if you go on down that path. Look, that four, that poor score of 4 with that sub-affected 4, will get out of his rolling average probably by next week, and that means that'll reset his break even. So as long as he stays in the side and isn't sub, I can't see why he's not going to score semi-decently. Those 69 and 67 are quite respectable outside his sub scores. And he definitely provides a lot of excitement through that and that transition from defense to attack with his ball movement. Ball movement through speed, which I guess the Dons can utilize quite effectively. They don't have too many players like that which can break the lines in that midfield. They've obviously got Redmond and McGrath that do it through half back, but really pushing through the mids. Al Hawley breaks lines, which is really impressive. And he's definitely one to keep into consideration, and one I think that could be quite beneficial if you can facilitate it. And I would say if you're looking to bring in a premium and Al Hawley allows you to do that, downgrade and upgrade cycle, I would say go for it. There's not too many rookies on the horizon at least for this week that are definitely worth bringing in or ones that you definitely should be looking at bringing in. But before we move on to some other trading options, Josh Dunkley is one that I brought in last week. Or 2 weeks ago, last week. I've had him for 2 rounds. Scored a healthy 139, and I had him the week before, who scored 109. Before that, he was 100. 539k, break even of 71. I guess this question applies more so to do with a plethora of Lions midfielders, including, Will Ashcroft, Lachie Neale, Josh Dunkley. Is there too many mouths to feed in that Brisbane midfield, Nath, or do you reckon, you could almost take your pick with these Lions midfielders because of how well they are capable of scoring? Or do you reckon that, we come into this scenario where they kind of take points off each other too many times that it becomes, negatively impactful to your SuperCoach side?
Well, I've just had a look now. He's the 5th highest scoring midfielder for the year. So it's hard to ignore, it's hard to ignore his scoring power that he's had so far this year. But Lachie Neale has been a bit down. So I feel like him and McCluggage, that's Dunkley and McCluggage, are probably taking a lot of points from Neale at this stage. So I guess the question is whether or not Lachie Neale can get himself, back up and going. And if he can, Dunkley's probably going to be the one that's going to suffer. But, I feel like if sides are targeting Lachie, which they seem to be, then I can't see why, Dunkley can't keep this scoring going. So I think that's a really tricky one. I think it's more dependent on what happens with Lachie Neale as opposed to actually Dunkley, himself. I'm not saying, he's not a good player or anything. But yeah, I feel like in a lot of Lachie's lower games this year, the last couple of weeks, he's only scored 109. and 100. The 2 and 3 weeks ago, and Lockie Neal in that time went. He got 124 and 139, which are two of Lockie's highest scores for the year, and he only got 109 and 100. So I think that is going to be perhaps the only knock I have on Dunkley is that I feel like if Neal's, if Neal is getting paid attention to by someone, then he can get off the leash a bit more. But if Neal doesn't get that attention and it's sort of a bit more one-on-one, then perhaps he might struggle a bit more because Neal will be the main player in that midfield. So, yeah, it's a tricky one. You can't deny what he's done. I would probably lean towards no, not with a lot of confidence. Yeah, I don't really have a lot more to say other than that. Unfortunately, I just think that when Neal's been tagged out of games, Dunkley's done well, and when he hasn't been, he hasn't done as well. So take with that what you will. But yeah, you can't deny his scoring so far.
Yeah, I mean Dunkley's been uber consistent. I guess is one positive to look at it. He had that poor kind of 3-week patch where he scored from rounds 5 to 7, 88, 83, and then 100. But every other game he scored over 100, which is you can't complain. Look, you're probably not bringing him at a price where you're expecting consistent 130s and 140s. He's been very, very consistent nonetheless. I guess the one positive with him, in comparison to, say, someone like a Neal or a McCluggage, he's almost, third down the pecking order, even probably fourth down the pecking order with regards
he won't get tagged.
Yeah, exactly right. So, yeah, you'd be looking at tagging Neal first and a McCluggage and even a Will Ashcroft ahead of Dunkley. Dunkley's more that defensive midfielder who he did a tagging job on Matt Rowell last week. So he's one that, I guess he's safe from the tag and you don't have to worry about that unless opposition, midfielders just try and nullify each individual Brisbane midfielder, which is crazy talk. So I guess that's one positive that I think you can take with Dunkley. He's not going to get tags. So his floor score is going to be pretty high, and I guess someone that's more consistent than anything. And I guess if you have someone like that in your side, you don't have to worry about it as much. But at 540k, I think that's the main positive with him is you're paying a pretty good price for someone that was priced at 600k, almost a month ago or at the start of the season. So with a break even of 71, has a D's coming up, which is quite a favourable fixture, I think, for Dunkley. You can get quite a good score there, especially if they start paying more attention to Neal. And yeah, I think Dunkley, I've been pretty happy as an owner so far. And if you can continue down that trend and, get those 139 scores a bit more, or 130 plus scores a bit more frequently, then you're definitely laughing down the bank there and definitely can't complain with that. So I think if you're looking for a midfield option, he's definitely one to consider. And I guess if you look, I'm just looking at the players around that price now. If I just go from high to low, around that 540k mark, and I'm doing direct comparisons, you've got Dunkley there at 539k. Obviously, Sarong, you probably wouldn't buy at the moment with how average he's going. If you don't have Rosie, I'd probably have Rosie ahead of Dunkley, especially with that DPP eligibility coming up potentially in round 12. As a defender, you got Tom Green as well if you want to go a bit of a point of difference there at 544k. John Newcomb's as well, 544 as well. But, you can see there if teams start paying a bit more attention to him, his score is not as impactful. And then you're looking at, say, Libba Richards from the Dogs moving up into the 560k mark. So if you're looking at direct comparison, I think at that 540k price point, Dunkley's the best out of the bunch there. And I think if you're a little bit strapped for cash, he's one that definitely presents decent value. But just rounding off the trading targets for round 10 before we move on to some of the trade out options, I guess if you're looking for some value this week, Dane Zorko and Jordan Clark are probably two that present themselves as pretty good options in the back line. They've dropped a bit of cash with some poor scores along the way. Clark priced at 519k, got a break even of 103. Has a little bit of a tough matchup against the Giants coming up this weekend. So I don't know if he'll get attention. I'm assuming Toby Bedford probably goes to the one either Brayshaw or Sarong. I'd be surprised if they dump him on Clark. But with as we
Straight to
talked about,
Sarong.
yeah, I would say that as well. But with his rebounding ability, he's going to be really important for Freo if they have any chance against the Giants. And I could see him scoring quite nicely if he does so. The other one there being Dane Zorko. He dominated against the Roos, just got a lot of ball down there, especially with the Roos peppering the goal late. Scored a 166. I guess, last week we probably wouldn't be talking about him as heavily because if I just bring up his scores here.
Well, it's the second highest scoring defender for the year, Zorko, so
Yeah,
you can't
I
go
guess.
wrong.
Yeah, you definitely can't go wrong. First 3 rounds, 139, 136, 135, just dominated from the get-go. Then had a down patch where he didn't score a ton for 3 weeks, then scored 104, 95, and 166. Got a break-even of 53, so it's a very low break-even, a very capable break-even for him to break through. The only downside is if, Kadeem comes back sooner rather than later, how that impacts Zorko's halfback abilities. Does his position change when Kitty Coleman comes back? I would suggest that they really like the ball through Zorko's hands as well, so they could just tag team and play that halfback role, one on either side, to be honest. But if you want to get him this week, probably would be the week to do so. He dropped all the way down to 500k last week, has now rebounded up with that 166 to 531k. So we'll get back up into the 550s and 560s if you're not too careful. If you do want to bring him in, and I think he's a solid option nonetheless. He probably will finish around that, top 6 to 8, top 6 to 8 defenders, no problem there. But there are a few options to tinker with for your sides this round, this upcoming round. But moving on to some trade out options. This is where it gets a little bit bleak because there's not too many options that we have at the moment. And I guess not too many options to trade down to. We'll rattle through these quite quickly because I think a lot of teams are in a similar boat here. Riley Bice, we talked about him last week, 375.3k. We said we could hold him for potentially another week. He looked all right, 71. Wasn't amazing. I believe he did some sort of defensive work on Nick Martin when Nick Martin was going berserk. Didn't really work out too well. But before that, didn't score well with that 49 and had obviously that 101 beforehand. Do you reckon this is the time to move him on now, or is it one of those scenarios where we don't really have any options and we just keep holding him because he's an all right scorer on field? Or do you reckon this is the week we need to get rid of him and just get to a defensive premium straight away?
No, I think you've got to move Bison. I think he has hit the wall. I think Roberts and Blakey are sort of starting to take him away, and I think opposition sides, they're sort of starting to pay him a bit more attention given his start to the year. So he just doesn't seem to be getting as much free ball as what he did. So, I think he's done well. He's got what's he got, about 250 odd K. So he's done really well. But yeah, I think now's probably the right time to move on Bice, especially with that high break even. He has got that 100 score before, but yeah, I'm not sure if Carlton's a good matchup for him, considering that when I do my stats later on, I think Carlton are right now being the best defensive side over the last 5 weeks. So I would be moving him on and perhaps looking at perhaps the Bice to Zorko trade or the Bice to Clark trade that we spoke about on the last slide, which will only be about 140k to Clark and about 160k to Zorko. I think that'd be 2 options I'd be looking at.
Yeah, even Sinclair as well is
Sinclair,
not much money you're spending there to get up to a premium defender. And I think this is a week to do so before he drops even further in cash. Obviously, you could, keep him on there and keep holding him for the time being. But with that break even of 102, when you're looking to cash out rookies, this is a whole situation where you don't want to get too attached to them too quickly, because if you just keep holding, they start to lose money and then you start to lose value to get to those premiums. And I guess this week in particular, when you've got three that we've mentioned there that have really bottomed out to some degree in that low 500 category, this is a good week to do so, where you're not spending, breaking the bank to bring in a premium defender. And I think Bice is one that will continue to probably plateau in scoring with the likes of McInerney back. You've got Lloyd down there, Roberts down there, Blakey down there. There's a lot of mouths to feed down there, which is definitely frustrating for Bice owners, but I think a good time to get rid of him at this current stage. But another defender who's not been doing amazing in recent times. I guess we took him a little bit for granted because we only paid about 260 odd K for Caleb Daniel. But what are your thoughts on Daniel? I know a lot of people I've heard on social media potentially might be trading him out to, say, a Philippou, which banks you, or going earlier than Philippou, that is, banks you 120 odd K. What are your thoughts on Daniel? Because I know for my team, I've got essentially one extra forward. If I bump down Smith to the forward line, I've got Warner down there. So hypothetically speaking, if Daniel goes, I still have six premium forwards. Sorry, he's got a break even 121. Scores of 59, 89, and 89 in the last three. That 51 score is his most recent score, which he really suffered against the Lions. Do you reckon that 50 score is more of an outlier or something we see more frequently moving forward with Daniel?
No, I think he's a bit of a tricky one because he hasn't scored 100 now for a few weeks now, Caleb Daniel. I believe. So he's sort of in a bit of no man's land at the minute where, he hasn't scored 100 now for a month, which was against the Suns. But I think it's more so with how he's using the ball. I mean, I watched the last little bit of that Brisbane game, and he is just turning the ball over a lot. So, I don't know where I sit with Daniel, because he's shown before that he can be a marquee scorer. He's still the 8th highest scoring forward for the year. 8th, 9th if you include Bailey Smith. No, actually, no, take that back. He's 8th anyway. So, yeah, I mean, he's not doing a lot wrong. That was his first score under 80 for the year. Against a really sort of tough matchup with Brisbane, who are one of the better sides at turning the ball over in their front half. North Melbourne this week have got Richmond, who aren't as good. I reckon I'd be backing him into. I don't think he's going to get 121, but I'd be backing him in to get above 51. I'll say that much. So, I'd be happy to give Daniel one more go, and if that doesn't work, then perhaps we need to move him on. But yeah, I'd be happy to give him one more chance. Caleb Daniel.
Yeah, I think, I wouldn't knock you if you decide to trade him on, especially if you've got enough cover down back. I know a lot of players, not including myself, stupidly, have got Ryan Marich, who's scoring berserk in a very SuperCoach friendly role. If you've got him as well, and you've got, say, essentially 7 forwards through your flex or through DPP, I wouldn't see why you wouldn't get rid of Daniel now. He's got a break even 121, which he could well get against the Tigers with a pretty favourable matchup. But it just seems like his scoring has died off quite significantly from those early days that we were so looking forward to with Daniel. And I guess he's one that I don't think it'll hurt you either way, essentially, is what I'm saying, is if you get rid of him, especially for a premium, if this gets you up to, say, a Bontempelli through DPP, or if it gets you to one of those top forwards that we missed out on, then you could go that way. I would personally only get rid of him if you're getting that Bontempelli or a Butters. I know they've got super high break-evens. This is probably not the week to do it. But what I'm basically saying, if that gets you to a top liner elsewhere, then I would say go for it. But I guess he's pretty much, if you're looking at money-wise, he's probably peaked out is where he's at the moment. But I would say there's probably some other rookies to prioritise ahead of him, and I could see him doing quite well against the Tigers. He does have that really awkward round 12 bye, which I guess will hurt a lot when it comes to it, because if you look at the bye there, it's Carlton, North, Port Adelaide and the Dogs. And you look at the players that a lot of people got, like, for example, for me, I've got TDK, Chera, Daniel, Sherry, Sheasel, Rosie. That's already 6, and that's not including any dogs I've got. I don't think I've got any dogs at the moment, but say, other players have got Bontempelli, Bailey Dale in there. You got Zach Butters that shares that buy. You got Paddy Cripps that shares that buy. You got George Hewitt that shares that buy. You got a lot of decent options that do share that buy. So I guess you could almost hold him to his buy and then get rid of him there, or if you want to get rid of him earlier, just to ease up on that round 12 option and potentially get him to a Saints Freo player who don't have that round 13 buy, which is a lot more favourable, then I would say go for it. So I'd say with him, it's either or. I don't think you're losing out drastically too much which way you go. But before we move on to our vice captain and captaincy options there, I know it's right. It says Riley Bice there, but that's meant to be Caden Cleary. Cleary's 259k, break even at 55. His most recent score was the most concerning one. Before that, he had scored 63 and 89 and was scoring quite positively and a really safe rookie on field. I guess the big question there is, similar to Daniel, is what we're looking towards moving forward with Caden Cleary? I guess, can you hold him much longer? I know his break even's not huge, but do you reckon it's time to move on? Does that, if this allows you a 1 up, 1 down with, say, a Riley Bice, would you go for it, or is it there's merit in holding him a little bit longer to try and get as much cash out as possible?
Yeah, well, I think he's in the Caleb Daniel camp, as you touched on. But I will say Sydney were absolutely awful in that first half, and they only scored 2 goals. I think it was two goals to 9 or something at half time. Yeah, 2 goals. So they didn't really give him much chance to, to get himself really on the scoreboard.
Yeah.
Look, I think this is going to be really dependent on, on how Sydney are going for the rest of the year. We're going to touch on this later, but I don't think Sydney can make the finals, so I wouldn't be surprised if they just keep playing the kids this year. Because I think realistically, they're probably not challenging for the finals, so it could be a good year to just let him keep playing. In saying that, though, look, if we can get you someone who's a bit more reliable, I would probably say go for it. But I think he's on the bench for most people. If he's on your field and you've got no bench cover, well, then obviously it's a no-brainer. You'd probably move him on. But if he's just sitting there at F7 or F8, and it's not like he's, he's still scoring. It's not like he's giving you a 0. So, yeah, I think that one more depends on the makeup of your team. If you can get him either down to someone or use the money that you're going to downgrade or upgrade him to get in someone else, I'd probably say go for it. But yeah, if he's just sitting there on the bench, perhaps it might be worthwhile keeping him, because at least it provides you with, as someone who seems sort of reliable in that side, at least until Papley comes back in. So, I think in my position, I think I'm gonna have to hold him, even though I would like to move him on, because I don't think there's anyone who I can really trade down to. And then I'm kind of a bit short on money, so I think he's probably gonna have to stay. But I would like to hope he's got at least one more good score in him, and then perhaps you can move him on.
Yeah, he's one that I just had a look at his stats beforehand, before recording tonight, and that 35, it didn't really help. His tackle numbers were quite low. I believe, just looking at his stats there, against Essendon, what do we have? 3 tackles, 10 disposals, so nothing to write home about. No goals there, which really didn't help. And then the week beforehand, where he scored respectively 63, he had 7 tackles, 8 disposals, 1 goal. So the 7 tackles there really helped. And the week before that, he had Cleary, 5 tackles, 17 disposals, 1 behind. And then the week before that, against the Power. He got Cleary. 13 disposals and no tackles. So and he only scored 30 in that game there. So that was his last, 30 score there. So I think the correlation there that you can kind of make is when he doesn't get his tackle numbers up, doesn't score, and naturally doesn't get as much of the ball, because I think through his tackle pressure he gets that ball, he gets that turnover game going for the Swans, and that's really where he's therefore as a pressure forward. If that doesn't translate in the score in the stat sheet, that really impacts his score. We saw that, the 35 there and the 30 against Port Adelaide. That's where his lowest scores came from, and that's where really getting tackle numbers going. So, against the Blues, who knows, back at the SCG, could get that pressure game going for the Swans and really help Cleary. But I guess, he's at a price now where that break even's really creeping up, that he would need, another 80 and 90 to really reset that break even. Because if he's not, then he's probably going to meander around that price anyway. And if you can get a premium this week, I would say go for it, because you're probably not going to lose out too much. And who knows, by that stage, he's had a poor game now. It could even be sub, and Sheldrick comes back into that best 22. Who knows what exactly happens with how the Swans structure their side coming Friday night. So I guess it'll make your job a lot easier if he does get sub or doesn't get a game, because then that trade becomes a lot more easier to facilitate. But I guess you're probably not losing out too much. And if he gets you that premium, I'd say Cleary's probably a good option to go for. As much as there's a little bit more money to make, I'd say, but probably not too much, I'd say, with how he's tracking. But yeah, one to definitely consider. For me, because of how I'm going with some cash generation, he's probably one that I might go get El Hooley and get Bias up to Sinclair. Who knows? But that's one consideration I'm thinking of at the moment. But before we move on to our vice captaincy options for round 10, other options you could consider getting rid of. Matty Roberts did not score well against the Dons. Had a few turnovers, and his disposal efficiency wasn't amazing. He's one that, you could probably hold on a little bit until his bye, perhaps, and just see how he goes. He scores respectable enough that he's not, scoring 30s and 40s, that there's real red flags. I guess it's a different story if he does score that. But he's one that I would say just hold until his bye, perhaps, and re-evaluate then. But, you could also easily get up to, if you say you've already got rid of Bias, Roberts could be a quick way to get to Azor or Clark without burning too many trades. But as we've said before, and with these mid-price, you've just got to be a little bit careful, because you don't want to be in a scenario where you trade, say, a Roberts or Chera out and then bring in someone that didn't cost you much, only got you one trade, but then they score poorly as well, and then, say, Roberts scores 100 again. So just got to be a little bit watchful with how you do that sort of stuff. You really want to be confident with who you're bringing in so it doesn't screw your scoring up too much. But Kako is one that I believe both myself and Nathan traded out this week. I think, Nath, you said you brought in Dawson for him.
No, I ended up changing that.
Oh, did you? Who'd you bring in?
No, I brought in Dawson. I moved on Sardis because he got dropped.
Yeah, got dropped, yeah. Yeah, I brought in Chad Warner for Kako Chad Warner and Boxall with Flynn and Kako. I don't think Kako's got too much money to make at all. He was always going to be a slow burner. I think that slow burn's really starting to flicker out. He did not score well against the Swans, and he's just one that, he'll bob up for that old 50 and 60, but it is really hard seeing him get a spike score, that's for sure. So I think Kako is on his way out pretty quickly. And I think would be in a lot of people's plans this week with not too many other rookies ready to go down just as yet. But before we hear Nath's stats read, moving into round 10, just wanted to get your thoughts, Nathan, on the top options for our vice captains and captaincy options for not round 9, for round 10. Straight off the bat there, I think this week's going to be a really easy one for Ruckman. You got Sherry there, who dominated the round just gone. Against probably an underdone McInerney to some sorts in Darcy Fort combination. He went berserk in that last half of footy. I think he was on like 40 odd at halftime and basically scored, 140 points after that to get to a 186. He scored quite well against Nags last year in that matchup in round 21 against the Tigers. We all know Nankervis leaks a lot of points, which is beneficial for someone like a big bulky Cherry who can bully him around the ground a little bit more than, say, other ruckmen. So I could see him getting a really positive score there. Max Gawn didn't do so well in the Lions matchup in round 16, did okay in their previous matchup before that, I believe, scoring a 130 something, but he's in the form of his life at the moment, priced over 700k. So I would just slap on the captaincy option if you're worried about slim pickings. And I think a little bit of a point of difference there, Sinclair against West Coast. The last time they played a 140, I could see him doing what he wants through that half back line and the midfield, pushing forward and even scoring a couple goals. I think he's going to be really, really dangerous if West Coast don't really pay attention to him and, say, maybe put a bit more pressure on Wanganeen Miller. Sinclair could get off the chain quite easy against the Eagles. But what are your thoughts on the vice captain and captaincy options?
Yeah, I would tend to go along with that. It's kind of tricky because a lot of those captain options are on the Sunday with obviously Cherry and Gawn, which does make it tricky. So I'm just looking at the Thursday night game with Gold Coast and Hawthorn. There's probably not really a lot of people standing out on that Thursday night game, who I would be, confident putting on. The Friday night game, I feel like Carlton are going to dominate the clearances against Sydney. So perhaps if you've got like Hewitt or Cripps or someone like that, you could contemplate them. The Collingwood Adelaide one is interesting. So I think Dawson's going to go to Nick Dacos as a bit of a cooler role, if you will. But I think if you've got Isaac Rankin, I think this might be a bit of a left field option if you've got Rankin. He didn't get tagged last year, and he's shown when he doesn't get tagged, he can rip games apart. Obviously, he kicked the last goal in this corresponding game last year, which put Adelaide in front. And then, unfortunately, he ran too far with the ball, which was controversial at the time. I personally don't believe he did, but I think the footage would say otherwise on that. So, yeah, that's a bit of a left field one. And then, obviously, the Giants and Freo, I don't know what Adam Kingsley's got up his sleeve here, but I feel like he's going to try and do what St Kilda did to some degree and basically go a double tag on Brayshaw and Sarong, which would probably limit that. So I think this round is actually a really tricky round for a vice captain in captaincy myself. So, I mean, I don't really have anyone who I'd be comfortable with. So perhaps I'm going to go a bit left field and go with, because I actually don't have anyone in that Thursday night game, and I basically loop with Harry Boyd. I think I'm going to go Tom DeConning as mine against Sydney, just as a bit of a left field one. I know he hasn't been scoring great of late, but I don't know. I feel like if Carlton are to win this game, I feel like he's going to be the one who really gets them going. So I think that's sort of where I'm going this weekend. And then I think the captaincy, I think this week I'm going to put it on Tristan Cherry against Richmond. I think he is in the form of his life. And it's hard to ignore someone who I think is averaging 163 from his last 3 matches as a captain option. So, yeah, I think Cherry will be my captain.
Yeah. No, 100% agree. I think, as we mentioned beforehand, my internet's gone to shit again. There we go. Here we go. It's loaded up now. So, yeah, I'd say with that Sunday, you got to be a little bit careful there because Sherry and Gawn pretty much play consecutively. Gawn's got that 320 game and Sherry's got that 110 game. So, if you want to be really on the ball or you are going to be on the ball on that Sunday, I'd say Sherry and Gawn's a pretty good combination. I would say Sherry's probably going to score pretty well regardless. So if you have him as captaincy, it's no problem there. But yeah, I'd say a lot of the good options are going to be on that Sunday afternoon. you probably don't want to leave things. If you don't want to leave things too late, then as Nathan said, Isaac Rankin's a good left field option. The others are probably Bontempelli and Merrick going head to head in that fixture there. The Dogs and Essendon fixture, so I guess either of them are going to be pretty safe VC options. I probably wouldn't put the C straight on someone like a Merritt. Or Bontempelli, with the fact that Sherry plays plays the next game plays the Sunday game alongside Gawn. So I would say if you have one of those two play, chuck the VC on them and then leave the C to these big ruckmen there. Because I think I would say just foreboding a little bit on the Sunday, I would say there's a fair chance that if you don't have the C on either of, say, Sherry or Gawn, it's going to hurt big time, especially if they go those 180s, 190s, that's for sure. But moving on, before we wrap it up quickly, this episode, I know we've gone over the hour again, so thank you for listening this far if you have. But Nath, that's that matter. This is an interesting one. The image down there is basically the ladder as it stands for round 9. But what are your thoughts moving on to round 10, and how do you see round 10 unfolding this week?
Yeah, well, I just want to do a quick recap of round 9. So I flagged in last week's episode that it was upset galore, and it sort of boded to that to some degree. But yeah, I just want to once again touch on this expected scoring and accuracy, because we saw firsthand that it did cost sides massively their inability to convert. So Geelong cost themselves 10 points on the scoreboard, which in a 5-point or in a 4-point loss was very costly. The surprise one was North Melbourne. North Melbourne cost themselves 26 points on the scoreboard. So they should have beaten Brisbane on expected scores. They had that game won by 28 points on expected scores. So I don't know if that says more about North Melbourne and how good they were, or how flat Brisbane were, you know, with regards to that. But then on the flip side, some sides really got helped by their accuracy. So the Giants were only expected to kick 97 points. Obviously, we touched on Geelong were meant to kick 111. So yeah, to kick 105 was, you know, a 7 or 8 point, you know, improvement on where they should have been. And then in the showdown, Adelaide kicked 10 more points than what they should have, which in a 5-point win was a fantastic result. And then Essendon as well, in another close game, they only expected to score 53 points. So to get 71 was a great result for them, and ultimately it ended up winning them the game. That so, yeah, I don't think we've ever seen accuracy be more important in home and away football than now, and especially in close games. Quite often, it does come back, you know, down to a side taking their chances and the side not taking their chances. Interesting. I just want to touch real quick that. The Collingwood Fremantle. So despite Fremantle dominating all the stats, they actually still lost on expected score. So I think that is a very concerning for Fremantle, given that, you know, that they basically dominated every stat and they still weren't expected to win. So I don't know where I sit on Fremantle. So next thing I'm going to touch on is the ladder. So as you can see here, the ladder's, you know, down the bottom here. But I don't think there's going to be much change for the rest of the year. There hasn't been any change in the top 8 now for 4 weeks. And if I have a look at the, so on my website I use Wheelo Ratings, they've got like a ladder distribution and stuff. So right now, they are saying that the top 8 is basically set if all the results go as expected. That the bottom side in there is the Giants, and they've given them a 60% chance now of making the top 8. So, Yeah, I don't think there's going to be much change. I think the top 7 will all play finals. So, I think the Lions, Collingwood, Hawthorn, the Suns, Adelaide, the Dogs, and Geelong will all play in the finals. And then I think there's probably 2 or 3 sides who are fighting for 8th spot. And obviously the Giants are the ones who are in the running at the minute. So I think the ladder is sort of starting to sort itself out. But the interesting one as well is sort of, where the sides are going to finish. So right now, this distribution has Collingwood on top, and then Brisbane, Gold Coast, Adelaide, Hawthorn, and Geelong all on 15 wins. So there is still a lot to play out with regards to the makeup of that top, top 6 or 7 spots. That, even though the website here says that Collingwood a 27% chance of finishing on top, I still wouldn't be as confident on that. Just given the fact that, there is still a lot to play out, and Collingwood, although for the rest of the year, Collingwood do have a bit of an easier run. So it does factor in how your stats are looking, as well as, your opposition. But so that's available on the Wheeler website. And then I just really quickly want to take a look at the match previews. And in particular, this Collingwood v Adelaide matchup. So it's 2nd v 5th. But I think just having a look here, the last 4 matchups have all been decided by 5 points or less. And interestingly, Adelaide have not won in any of the last 9 matchups against Collingwood. So you can put it to the bank that I think this is going to be a really close game. As I said, the last 4 games have been decided by 5 points or less. And then if I have a look at the stats, so my big one is the turnover game. So Adelaide are 1 and Collingwood are 2 in the turnover game. And as we've touched on, I think there's only been once in the last 19 years where the Premier hasn't finished top 3 in that turnover differential. So the fact that Adelaide and Collingwood are both playing each other this week bodes, to a potential September preview. I think the only factor that's going to play in Collingwood's favour is the fact of the venue being the MCG. But even Adelaide Oval, Collingwood have done very well there historically. So I think this is going to be the game of the weekend, is that Collingwood Adelaide game. It's a shame that it's at 1:20 on a Saturday afternoon and it's not in a prime time slot. But yeah, I think that if Adelaide are to stamp themselves and, show the footballing world that they are a genuine contender, I think this is a game that perhaps they need to win. Which obviously, as I said, they haven't been helped by the umpiring in the last couple of matchups against Collingwood, which is always, a shame. But yeah, I feel like that this perhaps is Adelaide's best chance of finally claiming that Collingwood scalp. Given that they always seem to be really great matchups, and Adelaide, unfortunately, for whatever reason, just haven't been able to get over the top of Collingwood, despite the games being really, really close. So, I don't think it's going to be as close as last round. I don't think there's probably going to be as many upsets. But yeah, just a lot of close games that perhaps, as I said, there's probably not going to be as many obvious upsets. But yeah, I feel like this Collingwood Adelaide game could be a potential finals preview. And then I think next week I'm going to have a look again at the turnover stats, because it is always interesting having a look at going deeper into some stats and sort of seeing trends in the game and whatnot. So, yeah, they're my stats for the week. Just accuracy is important. How I think the ladder's pretty much set for the rest of the year.
Yep.
And then just having a look at this Collingwood Adelaide game, just briefly, which I think could be a potential September preview.
Yeah, definitely one to look forward to this weekend, and hopefully as we move throughout the season, Nathan's deep dive into these stats will assist a little bit in how you may look at certain players and how that correlates in certain teams. But that's all we got time for tonight. I know it's been a bumper of an episode with lots of information to unpack. Lots of topics to unpack, but hopefully your trades are fruitful for this week, and hopefully they can be really positive with how you go in the rankings, and hopefully your trades can help you move up the rankings, and hopefully you get a big score this weekend and look forward to a great round 10, that's for sure. But other than that, we'll catch you on the flip side of the weekend for our round 10 review.